On June 3rd, 1920, 102 years ago today, the U.S. commissioned what was described at the time as the largest and most formidable battleship afloat. USS Tennessee was the first of the so-called standard-type battleships to be built too late to see service in the Great War. And yet she was already an aged vessel when she sat next to USS West Virginia in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December 7th, 1941. But not only would Big Ten survive that battle, she would go on to serve in more battles than any other battleship of the U.S. in the Second World War. The service of USS Tennessee is history that deserves to be remembered. The U.S. standard-type battleships represented American naval thinking in the early 20th century. The idea of the standard type was that battleship designs, while still able to integrate innovations, would be tactically homogeneous. That is, new U.S. battleships would be designed to have the same top speed, 21 knots, and tactical turning radius, 700 yards. Thus, ships of different classes would be able to act as a tactical unit, unlike other navies whose battleships would have to be either limited to the performance of the slowest ship or have separate fast and slow battle wings. USS Nevada was the first of the standard-type battleships, laid down in November 1912 and commissioned in March 1916. 7 standard-type battleships, 2 Nevada-class, 2 Pennsylvania-class, and 3 New Mexico-class were designed before the Battle of Jutland. For the next class of battleships, called Battleship 16, as the design would be finalized in 1916, the Navy wanted to deviate from the standard type to incorporate lessons from the battle. That would be the Tennessee class. The Navy General Board wanted to do more than the incremental changes of the standard type, but Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels was concerned about cost and overruled the board. The 2 ships of the Tennessee class would be standard-type designs, incorporating incremental improvements over the previous New Mexico class. Among the improvements were better defense below the waterline, using torpedo bulkheads to protect from long-range torpedoes. And while the class would mount 12 of the same 14-inch 50-caliber main guns used by the New Mexico class in 4 triple-gun turrets, the turrets were raised, allowing the guns to depress to 30 degrees, greatly increasing the gun's maximum range by more than 5.5 miles over the New Mexico class, to more than 20 miles. 3 more standard-type battleships of the Colorado class were produced after Tennessee and California. The class, limited by the naval treaties, mounted 8 16-inch main guns rather than 12 14-inch guns. More modern than the previous ships of the standard type, the Navy referred to the 2 Tennessee-class and 3 Colorado-class ships as the Big Five. Tennessee was built at New York's Brooklyn Naval Yard, laid down May 14, 1917, and launched in April 1919. When she was commissioned, June 3, 1920, the Lincoln, Nebraska Star wrote that she is the next thing to the pleasure yacht in the comfort of her appointments for officers and men. Notably, the paper reported, Tennessee was also the first battleship to recruit her entire personnel from the state from which it takes its name. The Newton, Kansas Evening Kansan Republican wrote that the Tennessee represented the highest type in the development of the dreadnought class of sea fighters. With its crew of more than 1,000 men standing at attention, the paper reported, the Super Dreadnought Tennessee, the latest and greatest of Uncle Sam's fighting ships, was placed in commission at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. When commissioned, the Tennessee was 642 feet long, with a beam of 97 feet 5 inches, and displaced 32,300 long tons. She had initial difficulties. In October 1920, one of the ship's electric generators exploded, destroying the turbine and necessitating repairs that lasted until February 1921. After completing sea trials in June, she was assigned to the U.S. Pacific Fleet and transited the Panama Canal. Tennessee, along with the rest of the fleet, participated in regular training exercises, and it was those exercises that demonstrated the flaw in the standard type theory: block obsolescence. Since the 12 ships had been designed around being tactically homogeneous, when the tactical design became outdated, the entire battleship fleet became obsolete at once, a difficult problem since replacing that number of ships would take years. Notably, fleet exercises demonstrated the importance of aircraft carriers. The standard-type battleships could not keep up with the faster aircraft carriers, creating quite a hindrance to operations. The next class after the Colorado class, the North Carolina class, would be so-called fast battleships, capable of 28 knots. The Japanese super battleships Yamato and Musashi were built specifically to outclass the U.S. standard-type battleship fleet. Still, the Naval Encyclopedia writes, On December 6, 1941, the U.S. Navy was confident, despite 2 coastlines to defend and a few overseas possessions. The fleet's hopes rested on no less than 20 battleships, at the time the largest capital ships force worldwide. In late 1940, the Pacific Fleet, then called the Battle Forces, was relocated from San Pedro, California, to the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, a move intended to deter Japanese aggression. The morning of December 7th, Tennessee was on Battleship Row on the southeastern side of Ford Island at the key called Fox 6, moored alongside USS West Virginia. Arizona was astern, Maryland ahead, both approximately 75 feet distance. As Japanese planes started bombing Ford Island, the ship went to general quarters. Tennessee's position left her unable to maneuver, but West Virginia alongside prevented her from being attacked by torpedoes, while smoke from USS Arizona and West Virginia obscured the ship from attacking planes. But her position also meant that the men of the Tennessee were in a unique position to view the battle. Shortly after the battle, Sergeant Major Roger Emmons of the Tennessee's Marine Detachment wrote an account. The alarm gong sounded general quarters. I was so surprised I could hardly believe my ears, but the noise of explosions through the open ports forced it upon me. My battle station was on the 5-inch broadside guns, where I could see what was actually happening around us. The sky was dotted with black puffs of anti-aircraft fire. A plane trailing a plume of smoke was plunging earthward over Ford Island. Off in the direction of Schofield Barracks there was a vast cloud of black smoke. At the same time, 2 billowing pillars of smoke arose from the Navy Yard and the Hickam Field area. From his position, the sergeant major was able to observe the attack on USS Arizona. At about 8 a.m., a terrific explosion took place in our next astern, Arizona, which fairly lifted us in the water. She blew up in an enormous flame and a cloud of black smoke when her forward magazine exploded after a Japanese bomb had dropped down her funnel. Her back broken by the explosion, the entire forward portion of the ship canted away from the aft portion as the ship began to settle at the bottom. It was a scene which cannot easily be forgotten. The Arizona was a mass of fire from bow to foremast, on deck and between decks. And the surface of the water for a large distance around was a mass of flaming oil from millions of gallons of fuel oil. Over 1,000 dead men lay in her twisted wreck. The bombs that had destroyed Arizona were armored piercing bombs, actually converted large-caliber naval shells. 2 of the same kind of bombs struck Tennessee, but fortunately neither one fully exploded. The attack continued. Emmons wrote, "A few moments after this disaster, our attention was absorbed in the Oklahoma. Stabbed several times in her port side by torpedoes, she heeled very gently over and capsized within 9 minutes. The water was dotted with the heads of men. Some swam ashore, covered from head to foot with thick, oily scum, but hundreds had been trapped in the vessel's hull, were drowned. We had only been in the attack a few minutes when the West Virginia, about 20 feet on our port beam, began slowly to settle by the bow and then took a heavy list to port. She'd been badly hit by several torpedoes in the opening attack. In the midst of all this turmoil, the Nevada, the next ship astern of the blazing Arizona, got underway and headed for the channel. As she moved downstream, the vessel was a target of many enemy planes, until badly crippled by a torpedo, and after that she ran aground to prevent sinking. The Tennessee was pinned to the quay by the listing USS West Virginia. She had several fires aboard, and the sea around was all burning oil." The real story of this ship, Emmons wrote, lies in the splendid manner in which the officers and men on board arose to the emergency. When general quarters was sounded, all hands dashed to their battle stations. There was no panic. The shock found each and every man ready for his job. Anti-aircraft and machine guns were quickly manned, the first gun getting into action in less than 3 minutes after the alarm. For the next 40 minutes, the Tennessee was the center of a whirlwind of bombs and bullets. The Japanese planes bombed our ship and then bombed again. They opened up with machine guns and low-flying attacks. The ship's gun crews fought with utmost gallantry and in the most tenacious and determined manner. Hostile planes swooping down on what they thought was easy prey were greeted with volleys from our anti-aircraft and machine guns, and after such a warm reception, the Japanese ever gave the Tennessee a wide berth. It's difficult to write clearly of the details of this attack, for the whole thing outdid the most imaginative picture of a battle. The Japs dive-bombed our ships again and again, while low-flying planes, no more than 100 feet above the water, strafed the gun crews. They flew to the end of the bay, made a turn, and came back. A terrible scene of destruction was revealed to me as I took a general look around. The West Virginia, just abeam of us, was blazing furiously. Only the bottom of Oklahoma was visible. The Arizona was an inferno now, emitting dense volumes of smoke which hung over the harbor like a funeral pall. Our next ahead, Maryland, was hit by a large bomb on the forecastle, which penetrated the deck and made an ugly hole in her port bow. An armored piercing bomb had exploded in one of the casemates of the Pennsylvania. Looking towards the California, I noticed that she had a heavy list to the port side. Tennessee had taken damage. Two of her main turrets were disabled. 4 crew were killed, and her hull was buckled from the heat. The captain, Charles E. Reardon, a 1909 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, ordered the ship forward to separate her from the burning oil. While the ship proved unable to move, the turning screws pushed the flaming oil back, possibly saving the ship. Still, some plates were so buckled from the heat that the ship needed repairs before it could get underway to the west coast for repair and refit. On December 20th, she put to sea with Maryland and Pennsylvania. She underwent significant refit and modernization at Puget Sound Naval Yard. She had additional torpedo blisters added, and her anti-aircraft guns were significantly modified and upgraded, giving her a more modern appearance. She returned to service in May 1943. Still, Tennessee faced the same obstacles that had been obvious even before Pearl Harbor. She couldn't keep up with the aircraft carriers and the long-range attacks that characterized the war in the Pacific. After their originally envisioned role as a battle line in a fleet engagement was not to be, the ships of the standard type would find a new role, using their powerful main guns and secondary 5-inch armament supporting amphibious landings. And none would do so more than Tennessee. Tennessee's first bombardment duty was in August, supporting efforts to retake the Alaskan island of Kiska. The pounding of her 5- and 14-inch shells turned out to be unnecessary as ground forces landed on the island discovered that the Japanese had secretly abandoned the island in July. But her guns would have more effect in November, where she and Colorado supported the invasion of Tarawa, a battle in which the Navy learned valuable lessons about pre-invasion bombardment. Tennessee put those lessons to use. In January, she and Pennsylvania supported the invasion of Kwajalein Atoll. In February, Colorado joined Pennsylvania and Tennessee supporting the invasion of Innowetak Atoll in the Marshall Islands. In March, she joined 3 New Mexico-class battleships bombarding Kaving Island in the Bismarck Archipelago. In June, her guns supported the invasion of Saipan. In July, the invasions of Guam and Tinian. In August, she supported the invasion of the island of Anguar and Peleliu in the Palau Islands. In October, she bombarded Japanese positions supporting the invasion of the Philippine island of Leyte. The night of October 25th, she was in the battle line in the Surigao Strait, firing 6 salvos at the battleships Yamashiro and Mogami. It was the last engagement between battleships in history. She narrowly avoided a collision with her sister ship, California, after California's captain misinterpreted an order to turn. The following February, Tennessee spent 2 weeks supporting the invasion of Iwo Jima, where she fired 1,370 14-inch shells and 6,380 5-inch rounds. On March 26, Tennessee was one of the first ships to fire in the pre-invasion bombardment in the terrible Battle of Okinawa. The next day, she experienced the waves of kamikaze attacks that defined the naval battle off the island. She escaped damage that day, but on April 12th, one got through, crashing into her signal bridge, killing 22 and injuring 107. She underwent emergency repairs, but was back on station 2 days later. After support for the occupation and various duties, Tennessee returned to the United States via the Cape of Good Hope, because the torpedo blisters that had been added to her in 1942 made her too large to transit the Panama Canal. She arrived at the Philadelphia Naval Yard on December 7th, 1945, exactly 4 years after she had survived the attack on Pearl Harbor. In that time, the guns of the Big Ten had participated in 13 major battles, more than any other U.S. battleship, earning 10 battle stars and a Presidential Unit Citation. She had spent 339 days in combat areas, expended more than 9,000 14-inch rounds, and fired, according to the Museum of Scott County, Tennessee, which still displays the ship's bell and other memorabilia, more volleys than any other ship in the Second World War. Decommissioned in 1947, despite her age, Tennessee was placed in the U.S. Reserve Fleet. She was stricken from the rolls in March 1959. A brief effort by the state of Tennessee to acquire and preserve her as a museum ship failed when it was decided that she was unable to travel up the Mississippi River. She was sold for scrap and broken up in July. The website About Pearl Harbor notes that while not as widely recognized as USS Arizona, the Tennessee's survival during the attack on Pearl Harbor proved paramount to the success of the United States Navy in World War II. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on Forgotten History, all you have to do is subscribe.